No one in the Imperium truly remembers the last time the galaxy fell silent, real silence. Not the void muted by augur shadows, not the psionic hush before a warp storm erupts, not the quiet that follows exterminatus. This silence was different. It spread not from death, but from revelation. Across star systems separated by millennia of dust and war, the same message crackled through vox networks, astropathic choirs, and panicked civilian channels. Massive constructs detected, origin unknown, geometry impossible. They form a ring. At first, many dismissed it as the ramblings of frightened voidfarers, another superstition birthed from the unending terrors of M41. But then the picked captures arrived, clear, undeniable, towering arcs of alloy and stone suspended in space like halos set upon the darkness by some forgotten god. A ring world. No, many ring worlds, perfectly circular, 10,000 kilometers across, rotating with eerie precision, each surface cloaked in its own ecosystem, forests, deserts, oceans, mountains, all exposed to the void yet thriving under a perfectly calibrated energy field. It was beauty designed with such cold perfection that it felt like an insult to reality itself. Even the High Lords of Terror, beings accustomed to horrors and wonders beyond mortal comprehension, stared in speechless disbelief. Adeptus Mechanicus priests fell to their knees, whispering metallic psalms of awe and terror in equal measure. To them, this was blasphemy made manifest, a machine born not from the Omnissiah, nor shaped by the Emperor's hand, nor forged in any lineage they could trace. It was something older, something that refused to explain itself. A galaxy holds its breath. Within a single solar day, panic spread like wildfire. Merchant fleets altered their routes. Planetary governors invoked emergency lockdowns. Even the most remote frontier outposts received garbled warnings from passing void ships, stories of luminous arcs appearing in the dark between stars, silent and unmoving, like predatory beasts waiting for the right moment to strike. Rumors multiplied faster than any official decree could contain. Some whispered the rings were Necron in origin, new tomb constructs rising to reclaim the stars. Others believed it was a xenotrap, a weapon so vast that its shadow alone could swallow entire sectors. But the most dangerous rumor of all came from the ecclesiarchy's more fanatical preachers. These are the Emperor's crowns, they proclaimed, signs of his imminent return. In a galaxy built upon faith and fear, such words could ignite crusades overnight. The Inquisition moved swiftly. Ordo Xenos classified the rings as Omega-level threats, the same designation reserved for Tyrannid hive fleets, Necron dynasties, and warp entities capable of snuffing out entire sectors. Ordo Hereticus began quietly silencing priests whose sermons drifted too close to forbidden prophecy. Ordo Malleus watched the warp itself, searching for any psychic ripple that might betray a demonic plan. But the warp remained quiet, too quiet. It was as if the Immaterium itself was wary of these new intrusions. First contact with the impossible. As the Imperium reeled, the Mechanicus mobilized with single-minded fervor. Explorator fleets, some ancient enough to remember rogue traders who once charted untainted stars, were rerouted and reforged into armadas. Myriad Skitarii legions, Legio Cybernetica cohorts, and adepts of every rank-boarded vessels whose engines throbbed with machine spirit anticipation. The Adeptus Mechanicus had only one desire: to touch the impossible. The first fleet to reach a ring world transmitted continuous streams of data back to Mars, and as the numbers poured in, tech priests found themselves oscillating between ecstasy and madness. Impossible densities, flawless curvature, atmospheric layers perfectly suspended by an invisible lattice of energy, surface ecosystems arranged with mathematical elegance, each biome transitioning seamlessly into the next. No warp signature, no known power source, no creator. It was as though the ring was not built, but willed into existence. Some adepts whispered that only the Emperor's closest miracles bore such perfection. Others, more rational, more terrified, believed no human hand, divine or mortal, could produce such clarity of purpose. And then came the most chilling report. Surface scans indicate no life detected, but sensors register persistent anomalous shadows within internal sublayers. Shadows without mass, forms without movement, as if something long dormant was waiting behind the scenery, just beyond material perception. The Deathwatch kill team assigned to the expedition made landfall first. Their boots met artificial grass. Their armor reflected artificial sunlight. Their hearts, augmented to withstand horrors beyond sanity, pounded like war drums as they surveyed a world that felt real and unreal all at once. "Nothing alive," Brother Librarian Solgut murmured, "but something watches." His psychic whispers faded into the stillness. And then, over the course of hours, a new phenomenon emerged, faint echoes in the voxnet. Not voices, not exactly. More like memories, fragments of ancient signals, stretched thin by inconceivable time, bouncing endlessly within the ring's inner structure. Words distorted into static-laced groans, choruses collapsing into mechanical lamentations, instruments that no longer existed sending ghostly pulses through the dead air. It was as if the ring itself remembered something terrible and was trying to warn them. When faith meets terror, as news of the contact spread, the Imperium split into three emotional fronts. Millions believed the ring worlds were divine gifts, sanctuaries the Emperor had hidden until humanity proved worthy. Panimuni cults began mass pilgrimages, filling void ships to the brim with desperate faithful eager to kneel upon miraculous ground. Fear. Scholars and void captains whispered that anything built with such scale must have a purpose, and no purpose of this magnitude could ever be benign. Denial. Some Lord Governors simply refused to accept the truth, insisting that the rings were Eldar illusions or Xeno trickery because the alternative was too vast, too overwhelming for the human mind to comprehend. But fear is the most contagious force in the galaxy, and in the Imperium, fear becomes an empire of its own. The Emperor's shadow, in the halls of terror, beneath banners older than entire civilizations, the High Lords deliberated in frantic secrecy. The Lord Commander spoke of caution. The Fabricator General demanded control. The Ecclesiarch screamed of prophecy. The Grand Provost Marshal insisted on military lockdowns. Arguments became accusations. Accusations became threats. Threats became veiled declarations of war between the Imperium's own pillars. And beneath it all, a single question consumed them. Why have these rings appeared in M41 now? Why not during the Age of Apostasy, or the Horus Heresy, or the Dark Age of Technology? Why reveal themselves at humanity's weakest, most fractured moment, unless they appeared precisely because humanity was weak? A final test, a final doom, a final judgment. No one knew, no one dared guess, but every augur reading, every astropathic whisper, every prognostication from the Emperor's own golden throne pulsed with the same cold resonance. Something has awakened. Something ancient, something that remembers the flood, and it is watching. There is a moment, just before a ship translates from the warp back into real space, when even the most battle-hardened crew holds its breath. It is a fragile, hollow pause, stretched between madness and the cold comfort of physics. When the first Imperial Armada approached the ring, that moment never truly ended. The transition into real space was clean, almost gentle. No screaming warp echoes, no demonic claws raking across the Geller field, no psychic feedback tearing through the minds of the weak. The translation alarms chimed, the hololithic displays flickered to life, and the void spread before them like a still, black ocean. And there it was, the ring. It dominated the void in a way no planet ever could. A band of impossible scale, hanging in the darkness, its inner surface glowing with the soft, muted light of an artificial day. From a distance, it resembled a crescent, curving out of sight in both directions. The augur displays struggled to render it in full, their machine spirits shrieking under the weight of its geometry. On the command deck of the flagship, Magos Explorator Hestian stood perfectly still, surrounded by a forest of data cables plugged into the ports of his spine. His flesh eyes had been replaced centuries ago, yet he still felt the phantom sensation of pupils dilating in awe. His Binharig count grew harsher, more rapid, as new readings flowed into his cogitators like digital incense. No Geller residue, he hissed through his vox grill, voice layered with metallic harmonics. No warp echo. The structure exists entirely within the laws of the Immaterium. And yet, he trailed off. Mechanicus priests nearby exchanged uneasy glances, their red robes whispering as they shifted. A tech adept dared to ask, "And yet Magos?" Hestian's mechadendrites tightened around their plug stacks. For a moment, the only sound on the bridge was the dim hum of the plasma drives and the distant murmur of the crew. "And yet, it should not be possible," he said. "Every equation sings of collapse. Every projection insists on failure. But there it hangs perfect, eternal, unrepentant." No one replied. There was nothing to say. The descent. In the launch bays, Deathwatch kill teams prepared in silence. Black ceramite gleamed in the cold lumen light, inscribed with the sigils of 100 forgotten crusades. Each pauldron bore the badge of a different chapter: a howling wolf, a stylized fist, a bleeding chalice, a winged sword. Together they were a mosaic of loyalty, bound not to one homeworld, but to duty itself. Brother Sergeant Callian stood at the open ramp of the Thunderhawk, staring out into the void. The ring filled his vision, a curving wall of tiny continents and silver rivers. It should have inspired wonder. Instead, it felt like staring into the pupil of some colossal, sleeping eye. "Sergeant," the ship's pilot crackled over the internal vox. "Trajectory locked. We are green for descent." Callian's helm lenses dimmed slightly, compensating for the glow as the Thunderhawk's engines roared to life. Behind him, his squad checked weapons and seals with ritual precision. Bolts were blessed, power fields pre-charged. Litanies of readiness hissed through their private voxnet, half prayer, half programming. He gave a simple, final order. "Remember, brothers, this is not a crusade. This is a question." "We are the Emperor's answer." The Thunderhawk cut free, dropping into the dark. As they approached the ring, its scale became monstrous. What from afar seemed like a simple band of green and blue resolved into sprawling landmasses, mountain ranges, sprawling lakes, and vast plains rising up along the inner curve of the structure. The artificial atmosphere shimmered, held in place by an invisible tension that their instruments could not fully decode. "Atmosphere within acceptable parameters," intoned the squad's techmarine, his voice calm. "Gravity stable. Structural curvature consistent. Architecture non-human. Non-elder. Non-necron. Non-autochronic. Classification unknown. Unknown." In the grim darkness of the far future, that was the word that frightened them most. World without a sky. The Thunderhawk broke through the energy layer with barely a shudder. One instant they were surrounded by the emptiness of the void. The next, they were flying through clouds, clouds that had never formed over any natural ocean, never drifted across an organic sky. They came in low over a forest. Tall, graceful trees rose in elegant patterns, canopies swaying in a synthetic breeze. Rivers glittered, carving perfect paths through valleys that looked almost deliberate, as if someone had painted the idea of nature rather than allowing it to grow wild. "Too symmetrical," Callian murmured, "too ordered. To most humans, it would have been paradise. To Astartes, whose entire lives had been spent in battlefields and fortress monasteries, it felt like a lie." The Thunderhawk touched down in a clearing. The ramp slammed open. Armored giants stepped out onto soil that had never known the tread of man before. Their boots sank slightly into the earth. The air tasted clean, almost sweet, filtered through their rebreathers. Birds sang in the branches above, but there was something unsettlingly uniform in their calls, as if their songs had been harmonized by an unseen conductor. Callian signaled a perimeter sweep. Auspex units scanned for life signs, heat signatures, electromagnetic fluctuation. Nothing. Techmarine Varian reported. No sentient presence in a 5-kilometer radius. No fauna beyond low-tier herbivores and avian life. Machine signatures everywhere. Subsurface, deep. He knelt, gauntleted fingers digging through the soil until they met metal. "This world," he said softly, "wears its nature like a mask." Whispering vox. Hours passed. Away teams pushed deeper into the surrounding terrain, mapping and marking points of interest. Ruined structures, sleek, angular, but strangely graceful, rose from the landscape like the skeletons of forgotten temples. Narrow corridors led downward into the bowels of the ring, their walls marked with symbols that resisted any attempt at translation. Each step forward heightened the tension. There were no bodies, no signs of battle, no corrosion, no decay. This place did not look abandoned. It looked. Paused. On the orbiting flagship, Magos Hestian watched a flood of new data scroll across his displays. Structural analysis, energy readings, environmental cycles. The ring was not merely stable, it was self-correcting. Every deviation, every microscopic fluctuation was corrected in real time by systems buried hundreds of meters beneath the surface, like a heart that refused to stop beating. Then the Vox anomalies began. At first, they were minor. A hiss here, a crackle there, a faint echo of a word no one quite heard. Deathwatch Helm recordings later revealed that the distortions always seemed to occur when squads were alone, isolated, far from direct line of sight with one another. Varion, say again, Kalyan barked at one point, irritation bleeding through his usually controlled tone. I did not speak, Brother Sergeant, came the reply, but the Vox logs insisted otherwise. A low voice, layered with static, had whispered through the channel a single, warped phrase. Containment. Breached. Varian swore on the Omnissiah he had said nothing. Later, a second squad, exploring a subterranean chamber lined with inactive glyphs, reported hearing marching footsteps behind them, heavy, metallic, perfectly synchronized. When they turned, weapons raised. Nothing. The Auspex registered only their own heat, their own biosigns, their own dread, the edge of revelation. As more reports filtered upward, the atmosphere aboard the fleet changed. What had begun as wonder shifted into unease, and unease into something darker. Hestian found himself running simulations not on how to study the ring, but on how to destroy it. Every scenario ended the same way: failure. Macrocannons would scar its surface but not shatter its spine. Lance batteries would burn away layers of alloy and biosphere, yet the core would endure. Even cyclonic torpedoes, the Imperium's most brutal instruments of annihilation, might cripple ecosystems, but not unmake the fundamental geometry. The structure had not been built merely to be admired. It had been built to survive, to endure anything the galaxy could throw at it. Why? On the surface, Kalyan's squad reached the edge of a colossal chasm, cutting straight through the landscape like a wound. There was no visible bottom, only layer upon layer of platforms, conduits, and towers descending into darkness, illuminated by faint, pulsing lights, like the auric glow of a machine spirit dreaming in its sleep. Varian extended a servo skull. It drifted forward, Auspex arrays humming, energy levels increasing, he reported. We appear to have activated something. Kalyan watched as the lights below brightened, one by one, in a pattern that rolled across the chasm like the spread of dawn. Deactivate it, he ordered. I can't, Varian replied. We did not turn it on. The Vox crackled again. This time, every helmet in the squad recorded the same phrase, the same voice, the same terrible certainty. Quarantine zone. Compromised. The words were not heard in Low Gothic. They were not spoken with a human mouth, yet every mind translated them the same way, as if the meaning were being carved directly into their thoughts. Kalyan felt a chill crawl down his spine, gnawing even at his gene-forged calm. We are leaving, he said. Now. No one argued. As they withdrew, the ring continued to wake below them, its lights brightening, its buried mechanisms stirring. Systems dormant for uncounted millennia began to move with the slow, inexorable confidence of a predator stretching after a long sleep. In the void above, the Armada drifted, unaware of how close it stood to the event horizon of a new kind of nightmare. They had come seeking knowledge. They had found a question far older than the Imperium itself, and somewhere deep within the ring, behind layers of alloy and biomass and code, something that was not dead, not alive, but terribly hungry, heard their footsteps and turned its attention toward the stars of the 41st millennium. There are moments in the galaxy when history shifts quietly, invisibly long before anyone realizes they have crossed a threshold from which there is no return. The Imperium would later say that the Flood's awakening began with a single mistake, a single door opened by a team of explorers who did not understand what slept behind it. But the truth is harsher, older, and far more terrifying. The Flood did not wake because the Imperium arrived. It woke because the rings had waited long enough. The first breach, deep in the sublevels of the installation, beneath kilometers of alloy and artificial stone, the Death Watch spread out through a chamber shaped like a cathedral hollowed into the bones of a machine. Vast pillars rose like frozen lightning bolts, meeting a ceiling so far above that the helm lights could not reach it. Faint glyphs, alien, geometric, cold pulsed softly along the walls as though reacting to the Astartes' presence. Techmarine Varian advanced toward an ornate archway. It was not sealed, not truly. It simply existed, patient and untouched, as if waiting for something worth opening for. "Brother Sergeant," Varian said, "this structure, it predates any classification. Its locking mechanism is not mechanical. It responds to proximity, not input." Callian felt unease stir beneath his armor plates. "Explain." "It recognizes us," Varian answered. Before Callian could command withdrawal, the archway unfurled, petals of alloy and energy retracting in utter silence. Cold vapor drifted outward, carrying the metallic tang of sterility and something else, something faintly organic. Inside lay a containment vault, and floating in the center, held within stasis fields that flickered at the edges like dim lanterns, was a mass of shifting biomass gray, pulsing slowly, as if imitating the memory of a heartbeat. Varian stepped closer. "Life signs?" Callian asked. Varian hesitated, his auspex word chirping confused readings. "Unclear, Sergeant. The form is changing. Its structure is not constant. It is rewriting its own pattern." Then the lights went out. Not flickered, died. Ancient power relays that had survived uncounted millennia finally failed. The failing hum reverberated like a dying breath. Stasis collapsed. What floated inside the chamber fell, hitting the floor with a wet, hungry sound. Contact. Callian reacted instantly. Weapons ready. Formed the circle. The Astartes brought their bolters to bear, each step measured, controlled. Through his helm, Callian watched the mass twitch again, then rise, stretching like a creature remembering how to move. He had seen many horrors in his centuries of service. Tyrannid swarms, Genestealer cults, Daemon hosts. But nothing moved like this. Nothing exuded such purpose. The biomass quivered once more, then lunged. Bolter fire erupted, thunder filling the chamber. Explosive shells tore through the creature, shredding flesh that had no business being alive. Yet the biomass did not die. It reformed, reached, extended pseudopods laced with bone-like filaments toward the nearest Astartes. It struck Brother Targus. Only a touch, only a brush, and Targus screamed. The flood poured into him like liquid thought, devouring flesh through microscopic tendrils. His armor groaned under the force of internal expansion. Veins bulged. Helm systems crackled with panic-inducing static. "Sergeant," he managed before his visor shattered from within. In seconds, Targus was gone, not dead, consumed. His body rose abruptly into a grotesque imitation of life, limbs twitching in unnatural angles, eyes hollowed into black pits that stared without understanding. Callian fired 3 perfect shots into Targus's chest, blasting apart what had once been a loyal brother. The body collapsed. The biomass surged over it, absorbing, integrating, growing. "We are leaving," Callian said, voice a growl of fury and dread. Now, the flood spreads. The Death Watch made their escape through the tunnels, but everywhere they turned, the ring changed around them. Panels shifted, doors sealed or opened without command. Lights pulsed in patterns resembling neurons firing in a brain that had only just woken. Callian realized with chilling certainty, the ring was helping the flood, not willingly, no. Reflexively, defensively, as though it were responding to an old threat that had finally reappeared. "Magos Hestian," Callian barked over the vox. "Containment breach. Biomass, hostile parasitic. We need immediate extraction." But the vox crackled. There was no answer. Signal dampened, Varian growled. "Interference is not environmental, it's directed." Directed? By whom? Or rather, by what? The flood biomass swelled as it pursued them, devouring everything in its path. Walls began to ripple, the infection seeping into conduits like a stain. Techmarine Varian's auspex readings spiraled out of control. "It is learning," he whispered, horrified. "It is adapting to our presence." "Move," Callian commanded, "We will not die in a tomb built by Xenos ghosts." But even as he said the words, he knew. This was no tomb. It was a prison, and they had broken the lock. The grave mind stirs, far deeper below, in caverns sealed from sight by countless layers of alloy. The flood's awakening spread like a psychic tremor. A thought formed. Not a consciousness yet, not an intelligence yet, but the earliest echo of one. A hunger older than empires. A memory of war against beings who had tried to erase it from existence. A promise whispered across extinct stars. We endure. For now, the flood was small. A spark. A seed. But seeds, given time, become forests. And this seed had slept for hundreds of thousands of years, dreaming dark dreams of unity through consumption. It felt the minds of the Astartes above, bright, complex, ripe. It reached upward. Escape. Callion's squad burst into the open air. The forest looked different now, branches drooping unnaturally, leaves decaying as spores clung to their surfaces. Something wet glistened on the trunks, something that crawled. The flood had infected the world's ecosystem in minutes. As they sprinted toward the extraction point, shapes moved in the trees, distorted silhouettes. Too tall, too thin, joints bending where joints should not exist. Varian fired, and one of the shapes exploded into twisted limbs. "What were those?" growled Brother Cassian. "Native fauna," Varian answered grimly. "Repurposed. The flood was not merely a parasite, it was an engineer, a sculptor of life, a conqueror by consumption." The Thunderhawk roared overhead, its doors open, heavy bolters spitting fire. Callion shoved his squad aboard as the biomass surged onto the clearing like a tidal wave of flesh and bone. As soon as the ramp closed, he shouted, "Pilot, burn the ground behind us." The gunship ascended, engines screaming. Below, firestorms engulfed the forest, turning the infection to charred ash, but even ash twitched. Even ash moved. Even ash tried to rise. The warning. When Callion finally reached Vox range, Hestian's voice answered, shaken beyond Mechanicus' calm. "Sergeant, we detected a pulse. The ring is speaking." Translate. There was a pause. A hiss. "Fear. It repeats the same message," Hestian whispered. "Over and over." "What message?" The Magos' voice trembled. "Life world compromised. Quarantine extinction protocol preparing." The bridge fell silent. Callion felt a cold dread sink into the core of his enhanced heart. "Explain it, Magos." "The rings," Hestian said, "were built to destroy all thinking life in the galaxy if the flood could not be contained." The implications slammed into Callion like bolt of fire. "So the moment the flood wakes." "Yes," Hestian said. "The halo begins its countdown." Callion looked down at the infected world below, watching unnatural shapes writhe through burning forests. He whispered a single truth that none of them wanted to hear. "Then we did not discover a world, Magos. We unlocked the apocalypse built to stop it. There are wars that reshape star maps, others that erase civilizations. But the conflict that began on the Halo Ring was neither. It was an infection, one that spread not through borders or treaties, but through flesh, memory, and terror. And the first to sense it were not humans. Tyranids smell a new feast. Far beyond the ring system, drifting through the void like a living night terror, Hive Fleet Charybdis detected something new. Tyranids do not comprehend fear or curiosity, they only understand opportunity. And the flood was opportunity incarnate. A hive mind built on perfect biological convergence sensed another hive mind, one hungry, evolving, adaptable. A rival. A mirror. A temptation. Tyranid vanguard organisms arrived first. Lictors, gargoyles, spore minds drifting like drifting seeds of murder. They descended upon the infected world only to be met by shapes that resembled them, yet twisted into grotesque parodies. A lictor pounced upon a flood combat form. Its scythe talons severed limbs, its claws tore flesh, but the biomass reformed. Adapted, then answered. Tendrils wrapped around the lictor's carapace, prying open armor plates, flooding into nerve channels. Something impossibly ancient whispered across synaptic currents. "Join." Within minutes, the lictor became a flood form faster than before, stronger than before, now equipped with knowledge of Tyranid weaknesses. Above the planet, the Hive fleet reacted. Bioplasma volleys rained down. Capillary towers erupted through the crust. Tyrannid reinforcements poured in, millions strong, determined to consume the new threat. For the first time in their species' history, the Tyrannids hesitated. They tasted something familiar yet wrong. A mind not born of the cosmic genome but built of stolen memories. A will shaped by the death of entire galaxies. The flood surged. The Tyrannids swarmed. Two apex predators collided, and neither could truly kill the other. The Eldar wake to a nightmare they cannot flee. On Craftworld Ulthwé, Farsia Elandra collapsed mid-trance. Bonezingers rushed to her side, but she pushed them away, voice trembling. I saw the webway burn. The Eldar gathered in the dome of crystal seers, listening as Elandra described the vision. A sea of biomass, absorbing wraithbone, swallowing spirits whole. A mind made of many minds reaching into the webway, seeking the souls beyond flesh. A presence that did not belong to any thread of fate. This thing has no future, she whispered. No past. It was never meant to exist within our reality. In Eldar prophecy, every creature has a path, even the Tyrannids. But the Flood? The Flood was wrong. An intruder from a universe whose rules did not match their own. The Eldar reacted the only way they knew how. They ran. Craftworld engines flared as they prepared for immediate departure from the sector, but the Infinity Circuit screamed. Soulstones fractured. Something reached for them like a hand pressed against the veil of reality. We cannot run, Elandra breathed. If this thing spreads, the galaxy will die. Even the gods will be consumed. A grim silence fell. For the first time in millennia, the Eldar prepared for war not out of arrogance, but out of desperation. Chaos takes notice. In the warp, 4 gods turned their attention to the Halo system. Khorne felt warriors dying with no rage, no honor, only hungry silence. Tzeentch tasted a pattern without destiny, an infection with no psychic signature, no mutation of the warp, no fate. Nurgle reached for this new plague only to recoil in disgust. And Slaanesh heard a choir of devoured souls, singing not in ecstasy or agony, but in perfect, horrifying unity. To them, the Flood was an insult, a creature outside the Immaterium, a hunger that could not be bargained with or corrupted, a devouring force that took souls and left nothing for the warp. A Daemon prince named Vargax was the first to reach the ring. His brass-shod hooves struck the infected soil, warp energy crackling. Flood forms rushed him, only to be vaporized by his daemonic aura. He laughed. A terrible, echoing sound. You consume flesh, I consume universes. The Flood answered with silence. Then the soil beneath him erupted. Dozens of tentacles, sharpened like blades, pierced through his armor. Realizing his warp aura was being drained, Vargax roared and unleashed a psychic explosion that flattened the forest for kilometers. For a moment, the Daemons believed they had won. Then they watched the Flood reassemble immune to the warp, uninterested in submission, unafraid of gods. The warp shuddered. Chaos withdrew, not defeated, but offended, preparing to unleash legions upon the Halo ring in a fury matched only by the darkest days of the heresy. Orcs discover a new toy. On a nearby system, an orc rock floating through space intercepted a distress signal from the infected world. Big Mech Scrugger listened to the humans screaming over the vox. Something ate me leg. It's in me armor. Emperor save. Static. Scragger's face split into a wide, tusked grin. That sounds fun. Within hours, thousands of orc cruisers and rocks declared, "Wag." The entire force descended upon the ring world like a green tidal wave, excited not by strategy, but by the promise of a proper fight. They got their wish. The moment the orcs landed, Flood combat forms charged them. Orcs cheered, not caring if the enemy absorbed bullets, or regrew limbs, or fought like a nightmare version of themselves. "This is the best fight we've had in ages." One knob howled before being impaled by a Flood form, which then absorbed his biomass and rose again with orc-like muscle clusters and a roared, "WAA, gurgle." The orcs cheered louder. They did not realize the Flood was learning orc aggression, learning their crude cunning, their reckless fearlessness. Orcs are a plague. The Flood devours plagues. The ring began to tremble, two infectious forces screaming for dominance, two nightmares fighting for who gets to consume the galaxy first, and the Halo system shook with their war cries. The Imperium faces the truth. Aboard the flagship, Magos Hestian stared at growing data streams with dread. "Sergeant Callian," he whispered through Vox, "this conflict is escalating beyond containment." Callian had no patience for Mechanicus' panic. "Speak plainly, Magos." Hestian's voice cracked like a failing cogitator. "The Tyranids adapt through evolution. The Flood adapts through assimilation. If they continue to clash, they may create forms capable of resisting both warp and physical destruction. Orcs accelerate the process through sheer biomass." "And Eldar?" Callian asked. "They see the end coming. They are preparing their dead world fleets." Callian's visor dimmed as he looked upon the infected Halo surface. "So this is how galactic extinction begins?" "No," Hestian said, voice low and hollow. "That begins when the Flood's gravemind fully awakens. It is only partially conscious now. When it reaches critical mass." "What then?" The Magos paused. "When the gravemind awakens, the rings will activate." Callian felt something heavy settle in his chest. "All of them?" "Yes," Hestian whispered. "They were never meant to be weapons of conquest." The unthinkable truth unfolded. They were built to kill everything worth consuming every sentient mind, so the Flood would starve. The galaxy crosses the threshold. Tyranids, Eldar, Chaos, Orcs, humans, Necrons stirring in their tombs. All now converged on the Halo system. The Flood grew stronger with every corpse consumed. The rings awakened with every system breached. The Gravemind's whispers grew clearer across the psychic void. "We are many. We are one. We are inevitable." And across the entire Imperium, from hive cities to Terra itself, a chilling realization dawned. The Flood was not just a new enemy. It was a mirror held up to the galaxy. A hunger as perfect as any god's design. A threat as ancient as the first life form. A predator that could devour chaos, Tyranids, and humanity all the same. Warhammer 40K had met a rival that played by rules older than the warp, and the galaxy was not ready. For days, the Imperium believed the Halo rings were weapons, superstructures, forged by gods or ancients to eliminate life on an impossible scale. But the truth, when it finally emerged, was far worse. Weapons are built to destroy. These rings were built to erase. Erase life. Erase memory. Erase possibility. Erase the Flood. And the galaxy now stood on the threshold of a design older than any star in the Imperium's charts. The Mechanicus deciphers the impossible. On the flagship Lux Ultima, Magos Hestian stared at a stream of glyphs cascading across his hololithic displays. Each symbol flickered with alien precision, telling a story in a language no human mind was ever meant to comprehend. Tech priests chanted Binharic prayers, their voices trembling. Data robes swayed like blood-red shadows. Dozens of servitors plugged into cogitator stacks twitched as information overwhelmed their neural grafts. "Magos," an adept whispered, "we are reaching cognitive saturation. The data is rewriting itself faster than we can process." Hestian shook his head. "Not rewriting, remembering." At the center of the chamber, the projection solidified. A three-dimensional schematic of the Halo ring's activation sequence. Elegant, terrifying, absolute. The room fell silent. The Magos finally spoke. "These rings are synchronized." A hush. "Then this one ring," an adept began, "is merely one piece of a death network spanning the entire galaxy," Hestian finished. A wave of dread washed over the chamber. The Halo was not a singular threat. It was part of a constellation of annihilation, and if one reached critical activation, it would trigger all others. The Forerunner's final decision. Hestian accessed hidden layers buried deep beneath the activation sequence. Ancient logs, fragmented memories, conceptual echoes preserved within hard light matrices. As the data reconstructed itself, a ghostly image flickered into being. A being tall, robed in metallic filaments, its face a smooth, unreadable mask of Forerunner. The chamber held its breath as the echo began to speak, voice resonating like a memory half remembered. "We failed to contain them. The parasite devours all. No species, no empire, no god may survive its final form. The projection shifted scenes of Forerunner fleets burning in silent void, planets consumed in hours, civilizations collapsing not through war, but through assimilation. The Flood had devoured entire galaxies before. The Imperium was not the first, just the latest. The Forerunner voice continued. To starve the parasite, we cleanse the galaxy. To save eternity, we sacrifice the present. This is our sin, our duty, our last hope. The projection dimmed. Hestian whispered the words no one wanted to hear. They built the rings to kill everything with a soul. The cost of survival. The chamber erupted in panicked Binharik. Adepts argued. Others collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. Margos, a junior adept, stammered. If the Flood spreads beyond this system, Hestian closed his eyes. The rings will fire. And if they fire, the adept whispered, voice breaking, life ends. All life, Hestian said. Every civilized species, every thinking being, every psychic imprint, even the Emperor, someone whispered. Hestian turned sharply. This is not a weapon of the warp, not a psychic scourge. This is a physical purge of neural patterns across galactic scale. The Emperor's light would extinguish with the rest. Silence. Absolute. Horrifying. Even on the black ships, even in the darkest days of the heresy, no one had dared imagine such an ending. The Imperium denies the unthinkable. Aboard the bridge, Lord Admiral Veritas slammed his fist into the holotable. This is heresy of the highest order, he barked. No artifact, Xeno or otherwise, can extinguish the Emperor. Such blasphemy is impossible. Callian, helm under his arm, stepped forward. With respect, Lord Admiral, we have seen what the Flood does, and we have seen what the Ring prepares to do. You exaggerate, Space Marine. Callian fixed him with a cold, augmented stare. Brother Targus died standing. 5 seconds later, he rose again as a puppet. The parasite rewrote his biology faster than any apothecary could respond. No soul remained. The Admiral's face twisted with horror. Callian continued. The Ring detected this breach and began awakening systems older than humanity itself. Systems designed to prevent the Flood from consuming everything. And what exactly are these systems? Veritas demanded. Callian looked down at the infected world below, its forests twitching unnaturally, tendrils writhing across hills and mountains. The end, he said. The grave minds whisper. As the Imperium fought denial, deeper within the Ring, something vast stirred. The grave mind, not yet fully formed, no more than a partially conscious mass of shifting biomass in subterranean chasms, but it was growing, learning, listening, and it had begun to understand humanity. It reached outward, not through the warp, but through the living tissues of the Ring, through the air itself, through the patterns of sound and vibration, through the minds of those who dreamed. Hestian froze as a new signal flooded the Mechanicus arrays. Not Forerunner, not Flood, something between. A voice formed, resonating through static. We remember you. The Magos staggered. What? What does it mean? The voice grew stronger. You resist, you adapt, you are worthy, but you will join. Callian's blood ran cold. What is that? Hestian's hands shook. It is the beginning of a grave mind, he whispered. A nascent hive intelligence. When it matures, it will command every Flood form across the galaxy with perfect unity. And the rings? Callian asked. They will fire if the grave mind reaches full consciousness. Why? Callian demanded. Hestian slowly turned toward him, face ashen. To silence it. The debate of doom. Aboard the flagship, the High Command dissolved into chaos. If the Flood cannot be contained, we must destroy the Ring. We cannot destroy it, it survives Lance batteries. Call for Exterminatus. Exterminatus will not scratch its core. Summon the Inquisition. The Inquisition is already here. All eyes turned to the far end of the chamber. An Inquisitor, clad in black and bronze, stepped forward, his rosette gleaming like a blade. Inquisitor Malthor Kirel. He spoke with a calm that chilled the blood. You have all misunderstood the problem. He gestured toward the projection of the Halo Ring. This structure is not the enemy. It is the last defense against the enemy. Callian narrowed his eyes. Explain. The Flood will consume this galaxy unless the rings fire. Their creators understood this. Veritas paled. Are you suggesting we allow these abominations to activate? I am suggesting, Kirel said softly, that if the flood cannot be contained, sacrificing all sentient life is preferable to letting the parasite devour it. The room fell into stunned silence. The Inquisitor turned away from them all. We have one choice, prevent the Gravemind from awakening. And if we fail? Hestian asked. Kirel looked back, eyes cold as the void. Then we decide whether to fire the rings ourselves. The truth sinks in. Callian walked to the viewport. Below, tendrils of biomass climbed mountains. Flood forms moved in coordinated patterns, absorbing wildlife, turning entire ecosystems into fuel. He whispered, "This is what drove the Forerunners to extinction." Hestian joined him. "And this is the fate awaiting every world in the Imperium. What must we do?" Callian asked quietly. Hestian looked at the activation diagram, its elegance, its inevitability. "We must do what the ancients could not." "And what is that?" Hestian answered with a weight older than humanity. "Stop the flood, without firing the rings." The galaxy hung on the edge of that impossible hope, and the flood continued to grow. War in the 41st millennium is often described as endless, eternal, a cycle without beginning or conclusion, where victory is merely the privilege of dying last. But the conflict now unfolding around the Halo Ring was different. It had an ending, a precise, mathematical, horrifying ending etched into ancient Forerunner code long before humanity crawled from Terra's dust. And now, with each hour, that ending drew closer. The flood reaches critical mass. Beneath the world's surface, the nascent Gravemind grew. The Forerunners had crafted their chambers with brutal foresight, deep, dark pits designed to contain the early stages of the flood's collective intelligence. But containment required integrity. As the Imperium, Orcs, Tyranids, Chaos, and Eldar clashed across the ring's surface, the installation's infrastructure began to fracture. Flood biomass exploited every breach. It seeped into power conduits. It coiled around graviton stabilizers. It infiltrated energy routing that had lain dormant for millennia. And somewhere, in the deepest abyss, a voice began to shape itself out of stolen thoughts. We grow. We remember. We hunger. It was not yet a Gravemind. Not truly. But it was close enough for dread to spread through the Mechanicus fleet. Magos Hestian stared at a screen displaying biomass growth rates. His vocalizer crackled. At this pace, the flood will reach cognitive coherence within 70 hours. Callian leaned over the hololithic projection, helm under his arm. And when it does? Hestian hesitated. The rings will attempt automatic activation. And if the activation is prevented? Hestian's voice dropped into a whisper. Then the flood will take command of the installation themselves. Chaos intervenes. Warp rifts tore open above the ring, spilling nightmares into reality. Daemon engines descended like blighted comets, their shrieks echoing across the atmosphere. Brass-armored warriors of Khorne slammed into the flood-infested plains, axes dripping with warp-forged flame. Chaos had come not to save the galaxy, but to spite it. Their gods despised the flood not because it killed, not because it spread terror, but because it consumed souls without feeding the warp. To Chaos, the flood was a thief. Daemon Prince Vargax returned, towering over his legion, wings spread wide. "This world is ours," he roared. "We will unmake this parasite." He launched forward, carving through ranks of flood combat forms, each blow a thunderclap of warp energy. But the flood had adapted. Flood forms, shaped from orcs and tyranids, were primitive, raw brawlers and predators fused by infection. But now, newly formed flood monstrosities emerged, twisted by the biomass of Chaos Marines. They were tougher, stronger, attuned to warp energies in ways no Xeno abomination should be. Vargax swung his Daemon blade. A flood form caught it, adapting to warp resonance, its flesh hardening like a psychic shield. He stared in disbelief. "You mock the warp?" The flood answered by splitting the creature's chest open and releasing a cloud of spore motes that gnawed on warp essence. Even Chaos could feel something close to dread. Necrons awaken. In distant tomb worlds, silent sensors stirred. The Necrons were ancient, older than the Imperium, older than Chaos, older than the Eldar. and they recognized the signature of the Flood, a threat outside the natural order, a species without a soul, a vector of consumption that defied even the logic of death. Dynasty after dynasty activated, sleep cycles interrupted, Gauss flares powered, monoliths rose like obsidian pillars piercing the surface of forgotten worlds. But the one who spoke was Cyrek, the Silent King. He viewed the Flood through cold, calculating optics. They eat the living, and then they eat what makes the living sentient. He had once fled the Tyranids, recognizing their threat long before the Imperium understood. But the Flood was worse. Tyranids evolve, the Silent King whispered. But these, remember, he signaled a command across the galactic network. All dynasties, mobilize. We meet an enemy that devours stars. Moments later, a Necron fleet exited real space above the Halo ring, emerald energy crackling along their hulls. Gauss beams cut across the horizon, atomizing Flood biomass by the megaton. The Flood responded with bodies made from Necrons they had partially consumed, terrifying, half-metal abominations whose skeletal frames writhed with unnatural growth. The Silent King froze. They can infect the soulless. For the first time in 10 million years, he whispered a phrase no Necron had uttered since the war in heaven. Impossible, the Imperium's desperation. Inquisitor Maltha Kirel convened with Kallian, Magos Hestian, and Lord Admiral Veritas aboard the flagship Lux Ultima. A hololith displayed the Halo ring, flickering between three states. 98% stable, 92% stable, 87% stable. Hestian pointed at the divergence. The Tyranid Flood conflict caused power fluctuations in the ring's internal grid. Chaos bombardments have disrupted core conduits. Orc infestations have breached Forerunner vaults. So the ring grows weaker, Veritas said. Hestian shook his head. No, the ring is awakening. The hololith shifted, revealing the central control room dormant, but pulsing with increasing energy. Kirel's voice was quiet. Too quiet. We must reach the control room and seize it. Why? Kallian asked. To prevent automatic activation. And if the Flood get there first? Veritas asked. The Inquisitor's eyes darkened. Then the rings will fire, and the galaxy ends. Silence smothered the room. Finally Kallian spoke. We deploy immediately. The race begins. The Halo system erupted into full-scale apocalyptic war. Necrons teleported into Forerunner control stations. Chaos Marines stormed power junctions. Orcs rammed themselves into sealed vaults with sheer enthusiasm. Tyranids swarmed toward the control room, drawn by the psychic scent of the Gravemind. And the Flood simply consumed. The Imperium deployed an entire battle group. Astartes, Skitarii legions, Tempestus scions, Cataphractia pattern cohorts, Night households, and at the forefront, Kill Team Kallian, the first humans to set foot on the ring, led the assault. The Flood changes the rules. As the forces converged on the control room, the ground itself warped. Biomass erupted from the soil. Flood spires rose like cancerous obelisks. Tendrils stretched across the sky, forming chitinous bridges. A new whisper rasped across the Voxnet. Closer, we become. Kallian felt a chill crawl up his spine. The Gravemind is nearly awake. Flood superforms climbed over the horizon, towering monstrosities shaped from Tyranids, Orcs, and Astartes alike. They wielded muscle like armor, bone like blades, reflexes stolen from 1,000 minds. The Imperium opened fire with everything they had. Volkite weapons vaporized swaths of biomass. Neutron beams cut through Flood ranks. Heavy bolters chattered like storm winds. But the Flood did not break. They reorganized. They adapted. They struck. And Astartes fell, consumed in seconds. A knight was pulled down by a living avalanche. A monolith was swarmed and cracked apart. Magos Hestian whispered the truth. They learn faster than we can kill. The control room revealed. Through smoke and ruin, past the corpses of Xenos and mutants and fallen knights, the entrance to the control room finally appeared. A massive structure of silver-blue alloy, glowing with Forerunner energy. Perfect. Untouched. Waiting. Kirel raised his rosette. Kallian. Hestian. With me. Behind them, Warriors of a dozen factions tore each other apart to reach the same door. The flood surged forward like a living tide. Tyranids roared. Necrons teleported. Chaos shrieked. Orcs cheered. And the Gravemind whispered across the battlefield. One ring to starve us. One ring to deny us. One ring we must claim. The race reached its breaking point. And as Callian stepped into the threshold, he felt it. A rumble beneath the world. A shiver in the metal, a pulse in the air. The Halo ring had begun its final sequence. The entrance to the control room closed behind them with the sound of eternity locking its jaws shut. Brother Sergeant Callian had fought across 100 worlds, faced gods and monsters, defied nightmares birthed from the warp itself. But nothing in all his centuries of service prepared him for the chamber that now unfolded before him. It was vast, impossibly vast. A cathedral wrought not of stone and steel, but of hard light and holographic pillars rising like frozen sunbeams. Runes cascaded in the air like falling snowflakes, each one older than humanity. The air thrummed with quiet power too perfect, too pure, too indifferent. Kirel, the Inquisitor, stepped forward, his boots echoing with sacrificial finality. "This is the heart," he said quietly. The Forerunner mantle made manifest. Magos Hestian approached the central pedestal. His mechadendrites trembled not with fear, but with reverence. "I am interfacing now," he whispered. The pedestal responded to his touch. Light blossomed. The countdown begins. A holographic star map flickered into being above them, galactic in scale. Dozens of rings ignited across the map in a sequence that resembled a pulse through the bones of the universe. Callian's voice hardened. "What does this mean?" Hestian's Vox grill clicked. "Automatic activation has begun. The threat index has surpassed containment thresholds." Kirel narrowed his eyes. "How long?" "Hours," the Magos replied. "Perhaps less." Callian clenched a fist. "Shut it down." Hestian continued to search through data layers, his voice trembling. "I cannot." The Forerunners were absolute in their logic. Once the Gravemind reaches cognitive coherence, the rings must fire. Kirel stepped up beside the Magos. "Override it. Now." "That is a direct command." "I am trying." Then a new voice filled the chamber. Not human, not machine, not Forerunner. A whisper like the sound of every corpse on the ring, exhaling at once. "Do not resist us." The Gravemind speaks. The walls dimmed. The runes flickered. The air thickened. A shape materialized at the edge of the chamber, not physically, but conceptually. A mass of ideas wearing the shadow of a body. A consciousness forcing itself through the ring's neural pathways. The Gravemind was awake. "You struggle," it said, voice layered with 1,000 memories stolen from flood victims. "You cling to your fractured empires, your false gods, your broken destinies." Callian raised his bolter. But the Gravemind was not something he could shoot. "We have tasted your thoughts, son of Guilliman." Callian froze. "You fear failure more than death. You fear repeating the sins of a brotherhood shattered long ago." The Deathwatch veteran ground his teeth. "You know nothing of the Imperium. We know enough." The Gravemind's tones softened into mockery. "And you, Magos of Mars, you worship machines built by lesser minds. We have seen your Omnissiah. We have consumed worlds that thought like you." Hestian's mechanical limbs twitched. Overwhelmed, Kirel stepped forward, face cold. "What do you want?" The Gravemind replied. "To end individuality, to silence the chaos of freedom, to bring unity through us." "And if we refuse?" Kirel asked. The Gravemind's smile, impossibly felt, not seen, spread through the air. "Refusal is irrelevant." The battle at the door. Outside the control room, war reached its final fever pitch. Necrons unleashed waves of green annihilation. Tyranids roared as they evolved mid-battle. Chaos Marines invoked demonic might. Orc warbands screamed laughter as they died and rose again as flood monstrosities. Flood spires erupted across the ring, turning valleys into oceans of biomass. The door shook violently. Callian checked his weapon. "They will breach this door in minutes." Kirel nodded. "Then we must finish this before they do." The choice. Hestian accessed the final command layer, the one no Forerunner intended any mortal to touch. Streams of warnings filled the air. Galactic Purge Protocol. Critical Threat Index. Flood threshold exceeded. Callian stepped closer to the Megos. Can you stop it? Hestian did not answer immediately. Finally, he spoke with mechanical calm. There are 3 options, Kirill asked. State them. 1. Allow activation to proceed. All sapient life dies. The flood starve. Unacceptable, Callian growled. 2. Destroy the control room. Activation halts. The flood consume the galaxy. Kirill's jaw tightened. Even he would not entertain that outcome. 3. Hestian whispered. Manual override. A being must interface directly with the ring, fuse with its network, become its living command core. Callian frowned. What does that mean? A mind must replace the Forerunner machine spirit, but the interface requires the mind to be dissolved, absorbed, sacrificed. Kirill went silent. Callian understood. So someone must die. No, Hestian said. Someone must cease to exist. The flood attacks. The doors cracked. Flood tentacles tore through the seams. Warp-twisted flood forms screamed through the cracks. Tyrannid flood hybrids clawed at the threshold. The Gravemind's presence thickened in the air. Your choices are illusions. Submit. Become us. End the pain of individuality. Callian lifted his bolter. Pain is all humanity has left. The Gravemind paused. A strange melancholy entered its voice. Then let us take that burden from you. The doors buckled. Time was ending. Kirill turned to Callian. You know the Imperium cannot fire the rings. We cannot sacrifice the galaxy. And we cannot let the flood spread, Callian said. Hestian affirmed softly. Someone must interface. Kirill inhaled. Slowly. Calm. Resolute. It will be me. Callian turned sharply. What? You are needed to escape, Kirill said. To warn terror. To prepare defenses. My life was sworn to the Imperium, but my soul is mine to give. Hestian synced the interface. The pedestal opened like a blooming flower of light. The Gravemind shrieked, Do not interfere. The sacrifice. Kirill stepped into the light. His flesh burned first, then his bones, then his memories torn from him and woven into the ring's neural lattice. Callian watched as the Inquisitor dissolved into radiant dust. The voice that emerged from the pedestal was not quite Kirill's anymore. It was colder, wiser, everywhere. Rings, halted, flood, quarantined. The Gravemind howled across the entire installation. A psychic scream felt in every infected cell. Callian roared as the chamber shook. Magos, the structure. Hestian steadied himself. The ring cannot fire, but it also cannot contain. It is entering collapse. The end of the ring. The chamber split open. Cracks ran across the walls. Flood biomass surged inward. Energy beams flickered wildly. Callian grabbed Hestian by the arm. Evacuation. Now, they fled as the ring world tore itself apart. The sky cracked, revealing hard light fractures bleeding into the void. Flood towers collapsed into oceans of infected biomass. Necron pylons vaporized. Tyrannids shrieked as the ground swallowed them whole. Orcs cheered even as they died. Above it all, a single voice echoed, I hold them, but not for long. Callian understood. Kirill, whatever remained of him, was keeping the flood paralyzed, frozen in the ring's collapsing systems, at the cost of everything he once was. Escape. Callian and Hestian reached the extraction craft as the Halo ring tore apart like a wounded star. The fleet fired engines. Warp drive screamed. The Halo broke into a halo of light, ironic, terrifying, magnificent. A superstructure that had survived 1,000,000 years died in seconds. The flood with it, but not all. Hestian scanned the void. Fragments survived, flood biomass, drifting free. Callian closed his eyes. The galaxy is not safe. Hestian whispered the final truth. We delayed the apocalypse. We did not prevent it. The last words. As the fleet retreated into the void, a faint whisper echoed through the vox, fragmented and fading. Remember what I gave, to buy you time. Callian bowed his head. I will, Inquisitor. Humanity had survived, for now, but the flood had tasted this galaxy, and somewhere, in the cold dark between stars, A single spore floated, searching for a place to grow. The nightmare had only begun.